So we've already talked about how we can describe matter. So now let's talk about how matter can change. And this is just because I always love a good chemistry joke. I'll give you a moment to read that and then I'll just move along. Do you get it yet? Okay. So, what is a physical change? Well, a physical change is just a type of change which alters only the physical properties of a substance. It does not change the composition of that substance or the stuff that the substance is made of. It changes the outside, not the inside. Kind of like if you get a haircut, that's a physical change. You haven't changed who you are on the inside. You just changed how you look on the outside. So some examples are tearing, cutting, smashing, tearing a piece of paper, getting your hair cut, smashing a glass plate on the floor, breaking something. Those are all physical changes because we're not changing the inside. We're not changing what it's made of. We're just changing what it looks like. A couple examples that maybe aren't so obvious would be phase changes. So if something melts or vaporizes, that is still a physical change. We are not changing the substance, we're just changing its state of matter. Is it solid, liquid, or gas? And dissolving. So when I mix, we'll say a Kool-Aid packet with water, that's a physical change. If I boil all of the water away, I'll be left with that Kool-Aid powder at the end. And here's an example. It's just a nice picture. Gallium metal, I could actually put some in your hand right now and it would melt because it's so sensitive to temperature changes. Okay, and a chemical change, that is something that involves changing one or more substances into new substances. So this is typically what we would call a chemical reaction. And we have lots of examples of this too. If we burn something, if we cook something when we're digesting, when we see rust forming on iron, if something tarnishes, like when silver turns black, that's tarnishing. Those are all examples of chemical changes because we are completely changing one substance or multiple substances into brand new substances. When you have an egg, a raw egg, and then you cook it, it looks different because its chemical properties have changed and it is now a new substance. Digesting, rusting, everything. Those are new substances being formed. Oh, there's sugar burning. That's easy to do. But how do we know if something is a chemical or a physical change? We have to look for evidence. Evidence. Okay, and this is something that you just did with those videos. In your lab notebooks, you recorded before, during, and after for 5 different demonstrations. So please make sure you have that notebook handy so you can refer back to them. Now, what is actually considered evidence? Well, evidence of a physical change could be a change of state, so something simply melting or vaporizing, a temperature change, but it would have to be a temperature change that is expected. Like if I put metal over an open flame, we would expect it to heat up. That makes sense because we are applying heat. So that would just be a physical change. If there's an expected color change, like we have a red substance and we mix it with water and the water turns a shade of red, well, we expect that. Or I have a red substance and a blue substance and I mix them and they become purple. That is expected. That is a physical change. Just changing the shape or the texture, that's physical. And mixing, again, like the Kool-Aid in the water, the salt in the water, the sugar in the water, that is a physical change. Evidence for chemical changes would be temperature changes that are not expected. So you mix 2 substances together and all of a sudden the glass jar that it's in feels cold. Or we mix something clear and something white, and all of a sudden we see yellow. That's not expected. If we ever see bubbles forming where there were not bubbles before, or a gas forming where there was no gas before, that's hard evidence of a chemical change. And the same with odor. If something smelled pleasant and then all of a sudden maybe you pull something out of the refrigerator, you open the container and it smells horrible, that's because a lot of chemical changes have been occurring and you should throw that food away. A precipitate is a solid. So if you mix two substances in the liquid state together and all of a sudden we see a solid, that's because a chemical change has occurred. And mixing can be a sign of a can result in chemical change, but you would have to have mixing present with some of these other pieces of evidence. So if we mix something together and then gas is formed, or we mix something together and all of a sudden it smelled horrible, that would be evidence of a chemical change. And here I just provided a few examples that you can actually see. So here we're just mixing a powder and water. That's going to be a physical change. It's dissolving. That is physical. Here we see steam. And when something goes from liquid to gas or solid to gas, that is just a physical change. A broken egg, physical change. Here we see food that has gotten moldy. That is definitely a chemical change. We see some metal that has rusted, and it appears to be sticks on fire, all of which indicates a chemical change. That's the end of that presentation. So be sure to head back to Schoology so you can complete this week's assignments.